I grew up poor on a farm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That's me when I was a little girl. I'm wearing my Sunday dress. My mom had just given it to me, and I took a sticker and stuck it right in the middle. And that's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's not in the mitten, the Michigan that everybody seems to know. It's that scraggle up there by Lake Superior. And in growing up poor, there were many parts of my life. I attended Head Start. My parents benefited immensely from food stamps. My parents were severely undereducated. My dad worked in a lumber yard, and my mom cleaned up after people, including scrubbing their toilets. That's me with a bowl, and I grew up on a farm. And so part of farming life is that you learn how to cook, so I'm pretty good at cooking. You also learn how to deal with animals. You learn how to milk cows, which I do know how to do, and you learn how to pick up eggs and a variety of other things. The other thing you learn how to do is play a lot of games for free with your large families. So I did a lot of things as a child. I played kick the can. I'm sure some of you played that. I hope. Anybody? Anybody? Okay. I also played a game called Apples, which I'm sure you've never heard of because we had apple trees in our backyard. And what we would do is put some blankets under the apple trees, and we'd climb up the apple trees, and we'd shake them like crazy. And whoever got the most apples won. But the big prize was that we would bring the apples to my mom, and she would make apple pie, baked apples, applesauce, apples, but they were good, right? We also would ride around on tractors, which isn't very sexy, but I was very good at it, and I learned how to drive early. And one of the big things that I loved was my father, in the wintertime, because it's very cold, he would flood the backyard, and he would make us an ice rink. And even though it was really bumpy, and we would fall and run into the sides of buildings, I loved every minute of it. This is my house when I was growing up. And it was a series of sort of shacks that my dad would build as our family would get older. If you looked really closely, you can see that it's sort of haphazardly put together. I didn't know that I was poor until my house burned down when I was in 8th grade. And someone told me I was poor when I moved into a nearby town, and they said, "You're wearing other people's clothes." Of course, I had received free lunch, and I didn't really have the whitest blouses, and my tights had holes in them, but everybody looked like that, so I didn't really know I was poor. When I found out that I was poor, I never told my parents because I thought it would make them feel ashamed and I didn't want to hurt them. That's my mother, Lily. She is a beautiful soul. She's 84 years old and she is just full of life. She is pure joy. But when I was a child, she cried a lot. I would find her crying in rooms by herself. And it was because my father, although an adequate husband, he was mean and angry and resentful, and he verbally abused my mom. He called her stupid, and he would often do it in public. But my mom was a fighter. She was feisty. She grew up in Flint, Michigan, in an integrated community, and she was a completely different person than the other people in my community. She was a good soul. She is a good soul. My father was a racist, the worst kind. He hated African Americans, even though he never met an African American. He told us that African Americans were lazy and stupid. When my mother heard that, when she heard him saying the N-word over and over, and then my brothers saying the N-word over and over, she washed their mouths out with Zest soap. I never said that word, ever. Ironically, my father, he told us that black people were lazy and stupid and responsible for everything that was bad in the United States. Yet he was always trying to get everything free, including government cheese. And he stole from his employer, shaming our family. He used to take me to a coffee shop called Sambo's. I'm sure some of you might remember this restaurant. And he bought me these books about little black Sambo. I read them. I liked them. He never told me about the racial stereotypes that are in those books, but something seemed a little off. He told me Martin Luther King was a terrorist. But isn't this interesting? My father, who never met anybody black, loved to watch black people on TV. He loved Sanford & Son because it reinforced every stereotype that he believed about African Americans. And he loved Archie Bunker, not realizing that Archie Bunker is a characterization of the classic American bigot. My dad loved him. Let me tell you a little bit about my school. My school taught me nothing about African American history and culture. What they did teach me is how to participate in a slave auction. I learned how to buy and sell other people. I participated. It felt bad. And no one told us that it actually happened in real life. I remember in 7th grade, we were assigned in our social studies class, everyone was assigned a state. And I took South Carolina. Keep in mind, I had never been out of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I took South Carolina, and my teacher gave me all these resources to learn about South Carolina. And so I made a plantation house, and I made a beautiful Southern belle with a blue dress and porcelain skin and black hair and a hat. And I took little twigs and I put them next to the house, and I put cotton on top of them, and I made this gorgeous plantation house. And in my report, I didn't talk about slavery or who did all the work on that plantation at all, because no one ever taught me that in my history class, in my social studies class. That typewriter is my past and my future. When I was in high school, quite a few of my teachers told me that I should take a voc ed class. That's what poor kids do. A counselor told me that I should become a secretary because I could type 98 words a minute. That's pretty damn convenient for a productive faculty member. So all of these things, my mother with her fighting spirit, my father who I had to learn to fight and push back at over and over, my school, they all combined to make me who I am today. And one thing that I know is that there are many people who grow up white and poor who believe that they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, that they made it on their own, but not me. I know I didn't make it on my own. I made it because of my mom, and I made it because of a teacher named Mr. Fix who believed in me and thought I could go to college. Those people made me who I am. I also know something else about poor whites. They can mask their poverty. How do I know? Because I did it for a long time, up until I got tenure at the University of Pennsylvania. People of color, African Americans, they can't mask anything, which is why they experience more prejudice than poor whites. Oftentimes, people will say to me, Marybeth, given your past, you're from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, how did you ever end up doing work on African American history? And I will tell them that it was a journey. It's a personal journey for me to find the truth, to get at what was kept from me. And it brought me to this man, James Anderson. He's a professor at the University of Illinois. And he wrote this book called The Education of Blacks in the South. And this book talks about agency and activism among African Americans. I had never heard of anything like that. I was given that book by a professor at Indiana University when I was here getting my PhD. And that book set me on the course for a life dedicated to social justice, and it also ensured that I became a professor. This man, Charles Spurgeon Johnson, who was president of Fisk University, a historically black college from 1946 to 1956, I wrote an intellectual biography for my dissertation on this man. And a lot of times what people will tell you is that biographers fall in love with their subjects. And I have to admit, I fell in love with him because he wanted to create scholars and leaders of color, and he dedicated his life to that. And that's what I dedicated my life to. I teach history, and I use my classroom as a place of empowerment. Most historians traditionally have taught their classes using the frame of white men in wars. I don't. I want to be as inclusive as possible. I want every single student in my classroom to see themselves in the curriculum. I want them to feel empowered. It's not that I don't teach about white folks, but I just don't privilege them. I want students to know that they have a voice. I want them to feel brave. I want them to know that if they want to make meaningful change in the world, that it's completely possible. And so I give them lots and lots of examples of people just like them who made change. So on the screen behind me, you see 4 African-American men, and they're sitting at the Woolworth counter in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina, on February 1st, which happens to be my birthday, 1960. And they integrated that counter and basically set off the modern-day civil rights movement, and those were students. Oftentimes, people look at people like Cesar Chavez or Rosa Parks or Nelson Mandela as making great change, and they do. But it's the average person who makes the most change. And I want people to realize that. It's the average person, like my mother. And so what I try to do, and what I'm going to say to you is, don't be afraid, be brave, be willing to push back. Guess what? When you push back against the status quo, sometimes people don't like you. But who cares? Nobody is ever going to. You're never going to have a situation where everybody likes you. And it's okay. If people don't like you, it means you're probably doing something good once in a while. So I'm left with this question. Why are we afraid to speak up when we hold the power? Especially those of us who say that we care about equity. How can we sit in silence when we know that other people do not have the same opportunities that we do? How can we hoard opportunities? How can we be afraid if my mother, who was verbally abused, poor, and scrubbed toilets to put me through college alongside pushing back against my racist father, if she could stand up, why can't we? Why can't you? And I'm reminded of Martin Luther King when he said, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. That hits me at my core. So for those of you who don't think it's possible for people to change, I'm going to go back to my dad, because his redemption is my optimism. When my dad got older, he had a massive stroke. And you saw that picture of my mom. She's real little. She's only 4'8". She couldn't take care of him. So we had to move him to Tennessee to be near my sister, and we moved him to a nursing home. And there are a variety of differences between the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Tennessee. And one of them is there are black people. So in the nursing home, there were lots of black people. And my dad didn't like it. And he kicked and he screamed and he broke a window and he hit a nurse and he yelled out every racial slur you could think of. But after a while, he realized that guess what? There are black World War II veterans. There are black people who play dominoes. There are black people who like John Wayne movies. He had a lot in common with the black people at the nursing home. And he made friends. And he became a different person. And he became a happy person. And I got the opportunity before he passed away to ask him why he hated black people so much. I just wanted to know. And he said, because I hated myself. I hated who I was. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to do, so I needed someone to blame. And I blamed African Americans because they were an easy scapegoat. So I want you to think, how often are African Americans or other people of color an easy scapegoat for you? He taught me so much about American racism. And you know, it seems odd, but my father is the reason why I do what I do, why I do research in the area that I do, why I live a life dedicated to social justice. And he is the reason why I will always be optimistic that anyone can change, even the most stubborn person. Thank you. Thank you.